So passive patterns are patterns that are created without any sort of outside external force other than gravity or contact. So we're going to first start off with dropping blood at 90 degrees to see what we get. So I'm going to take a pipette and a small amount of blood and hold it directly above and drop it. So when our sphere of blood strikes a surface at 90 degrees, we have a very even, round circle at a crime scene. But also what affects the way our bloodstain looks is the surface itself. We have plexiglass, and we notice that the edge characteristics of our bloodstain are very even. Now that we observed the way that blood acts on a smooth surface, let's try tile, which has a little bit of texture to it. One drop of blood, straight down onto a different surface now. You can see a little bit of scalloping around the edges there. That's because of the surface texture. So the scalloping is just the different ways that we describe the edge characteristics of bloodstains. So it could be smooth, uniform, it could be scalloped, or it could be spiny. So now we change the surface to a rougher surface, wood. So we can see a vast difference from where we started, where we had smooth edge characteristics. Now we have this spinier pattern because that blood drop is being disrupted by the surface itself. And we can also see we have some satellite stains. Satellite stains are stains that come off a parent stain. So this main stain here is my parent stain. In this case, because of the disruption, they are being forced out from the center of it. We also see satellite spatter when blood is being dripped into blood. Typically at a crime scene, especially with stabbings, we want to look for these drip patterns. It could be that the suspect accidentally cuts themselves and they're moving around a crime scene and fleeing the crime scene, and they could leave blood trails that we could follow. Next, we're going to be looking at contact transfer stains. A transfer pattern is a passive pattern where we have a bloody surface coming in contact with another surface. And then sometimes we could actually figure out what made that transfer, whether it was a hand or a weapon or someone's clothing. I mean, that's the best type of evidence that we could have at a crime scene. We have the victim's blood and we have the suspect's impression. There's very few explanations of how that happens. So we're going to start off with a shoe wear impression in blood. So this could be our victim walking through blood, creating patterns in our crime scene, or this could be the suspect's shoe wear impression. We're going to coat the bottom of the shoe and we're going to transfer the pattern of the bottom of the shoe to our clean surface. So I have my shoe wear that's completely coated in blood, and then inside that crime scene, we have a transfer of that pattern. And we'll notice is that that pattern gets lighter and lighter as we move along. What we don't see with our naked eye, we could find later on with chemicals like luminol or blue star. So we could see a continuation of that pattern as someone walks away from a crime scene. Sometimes we see transfer patterns in textiles. So next we're going to take some blood, saturate a portion of our jeans with it, and we're going to transfer that onto our surface. So sometimes in real crime scenes, these get misinterpreted as the lines of minutia in your fingerprints or a palm print. What we would see is that unlike fingerprints, they're just straight lines. Either way, we would document this and collect it and send it to the lab, and then under magnification, analyze it. So next we're going to discuss how movement could affect these transfer stain patterns. So I'm going to take some blood and put it onto my hand and then move that across the surface. So if I touch the surface and then move my hand, we see what's called feathering. The effect of movement on blood, just like if I took a paintbrush and moved it across a wall, in the beginning it would be darker, but eventually it would get lighter. So this feathering effect helps us interpret movement at a crime scene. This could be found at a crime scene in many different ways. One could be a suspect has blood on their hands and they move it across a clean surface. And another very common way that we see these patterns at a crime scene are what's called drag marks. We have a victim that's bleeding and either they're moving through the scene or someone's dragging them through the scene. And we see the same effect, that feathering going towards the body. Next, we're going to cover flow patterns, and that is a volume of blood being affected by gravity. So we can see here is that gravity is pulling upon that blood and pulling it down on our surface. At crime scenes, this may be very valuable evidence when we observe our victims' injuries. A person had an injury to their shoulder. If they're standing or if their body is erect, that flow pattern should go straight down their arm. But if they've been moved or there's movement or that injury was caused when they're laying down, we'd see a different flow pattern. So next we're going to discuss saturation and pooling patterns that we'd have at a crime scene. Saturation and pooling patterns could tell us that someone is bleeding in a certain part in a crime scene for a period of time. Sometimes when we see bubbles at a scene, that could mean that we have a expirated pattern or a pattern that's coming from an airway. But let's pop those because we don't want. But what this could tell me is that we had accumulation of blood there and that there is been no movement, because if this happened and then we moved the shirt, we would see that the blood would move in that direction. Typically we'll see this on mattresses or beds or bedding, and then it would absorb a little more. So now we're gonna have an accumulation of blood on a non-porous surface, and we'll see pooling. So pooling and saturation, it's the same mechanism that we're looking at, just the accumulation of blood. But with pooling, the blood is not being absorbed into the surface. For pools of blood, what we'll see with actual whole blood that has fibrin in it, they will dry a lot slower than it would in something that's absorbent, but also we're gonna see over a period of time is clotting inside that pool. And then sometimes we'll see affect what's called serum separation. So the edges of this will be clear where we see the plasma of the blood as it separates. So now we're moving on to the spatter category of bloodstain pattern analysis. With this category of bloodstains, we're looking at some sort of external force on an open source of blood. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put a small amount of blood on our wood here. I'm gonna strike it with a hammer, and what we should see is an impact spatter on the plexiglass in front of us. Put on my goggles. I'm gonna put my hood up. Give us a small amount of blood here. All right, you ready? There we go. So as you can see, not only do we have impact spatter on the plexiglass in front of us, we also have it on our suspect here. Okay, so we applied force to an open source of blood, and we have a resulting impact stain.